Let's do a technical breakdown on why I believe Islam Makhachev will defeat Charles Oliveira at UFC 280 and why I think Charles Oliveira is not the guy to derail the Dagestani train.
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
So I think that Islam's style matches up very well with Charles Oliveira on paper. I think he is kind of the prototype fighter that is built to beat a fighter like Charles Oliveira. Islam Makhachev's style, it consists of just being a very cautious, counter-striking, feint-heavy wrestler. He mainly uses his strikes as a way to set up the shot or to set up the clinch to work into his takedowns. He has an elite, varied wrestling attack. He can hit trips, he can hit body locks, he can drop to the single leg, double leg. He has a lot of ways to take you down and from very deceptive positions, which I'll go into more specifically. One of Charles Oliveira's strengths is how he is an opportunist who can jump on submissions as soon as they open up or create those openings. You know, he has a very fast working mind that can just see those openings, hone in on them and jump all over them before most of us even see them at home, you know, watching the fights. Islam is exactly like that as well. He is an opportunist. He hasn't capitalized it on it as much as Oliveira has in terms of landing submissions that finish fights. But make no mistake about it, Islam is very quick at jumping on openings and he has very fast transitions. And I think that's going to play into his favor here in this fight against someone with a similar style in that regard. Rafael Fiziev was somebody that said that Islam's style is a nightmare matchup for anybody. That blend of counter-striking with wrestling is just really hard to deal with. You know, there's so much to worry about. There's so much to think about.
He fight like counter punches. He counter puncher in striking and have good wrestling. This mix, counter puncher and wrestling, this very hard fight because you need to attack him, but he wrestling too. It's not comfortable for everyone in this division.
I want to jump in here to some numbers real quick, some numbers that I believe are significant in this fight. First one I want to look at here is significant strike defense on Islam's profile here on UFC Stats. So significant strike defense is defined as the percent of opponent strikes that did not land. Islam's significant strike defense is 68%. Now, to give that some context and compare it to other great strikers, or possibly even better strikers, Peter Yan has a significant strike defense of 61%. Israel Adesanya has a significant strike defense of 59%. Islam's defense, significant strike defense, is actually higher than both of these guys. And now the immediate argument you can make there is that Yan and Adesanya have faced tougher competition overall as champions and challengers for the title, fighting #1 contenders, more guys in the top 10 overall. So it would make sense that they would get hit more overall, even in spite of their striking ability. I can't disagree with that, but it is something worth noting that Islam's significant strike defense is high compared to his peers. It is up there with the rest of them. Now, similarly, his significant strikes absorbed per minute comes in at 0.84. Again, going back to Yan, his comes in at 3.88. Adesanya, 2.67. So again, Makhachev is getting hit less on average per minute than those two guys. And if we look at the leaderboard here, Islam Makhachev actually leads the entire UFC out of anyone with at least 5 UFC fights. And also this is in history. This is across UFC history because we can see some names here like Renato Sobral, Matt Lindland, Rico Rodriguez, guys that are just not in the UFC anymore. Islam is the least hit guy right now in the UFC, at least per minute. He absorbs the least amount of strikes per minute. Very impressive, and is a testament to his cautious counter-striking style, his feint-heavy style, as I referenced before. Looking at Charles Oliveira, his significant strike defense is 52%, and his absorbed per minute is 3.18. So Charles is getting hit more often, and he's getting hit by more significant strikes, which really isn't a surprise if you watch his fights. He tends to get tagged a lot, he tends to get stunned while he's moving in with his aggressive style and looking to get the finish and looking to set up, you know, a submission opportunity by stunning the other guy, throwing knees, kicks, punches, all that. So we know that Charles gets hit on average pretty often, and the data reflects that. So the next stat I want to take a look at is takedown accuracy. On Fight Metric, they say here that takedown accuracy simply divides the number of takedowns landed by the number attempted and produces an accuracy percentage. So going back to Islam here, he has a takedown accuracy of 65%. Now, to give that some context again, let's take a look at some other wrestling heavy fighters such as Gregor Gillespie, former D1 champion. He has a takedown accuracy of 48%. Kamaru Usman has a takedown accuracy of 48%. Khabib, also 48%. It's odd that these guys are all 48%. And looking at somebody like GSP, had an incredible 74% takedown accuracy. But you can see here that Islam's takedown accuracy is actually higher than Gillespie, higher than Usman, higher than his training partner and mentor Khabib, and is in between all those guys in GSP. So very accurate with his takedown attempts. And taking a look here back at Charles Oliveira, his takedown accuracy is 40%. So quite a bit lower. He definitely has different ways of entering takedowns, and they can get kind of wild. So I'm going to take a look at that as well. So yeah, let's move on to some of the things specifically with Islam's style that I believe are strengths of his versus Oliveira's weaknesses. All right, so let's dive into some study here of some film. I did want to use video footage for this, but I don't want the UFC feds kicking down my door for copyright issues.
FBI, open up!
Here on YouTube, either now or later. So it's going to be a lot of still images, but I took a lot of them to try to give some detail and to really show some of the elements that I'm talking about here. The first thing with Islam that I want to go over is his striking. So his striking typically is pretty underrated by people. I think people think that, you know, in general, that he doesn't really have great striking, or it's not notable, or it doesn't have a lot of power. But there is some significant things about his striking that cause a lot of problems and present a huge challenge for somebody like Oliveira. Now, like I said before, his style is heavily reliant on being the counter striker, throwing lots of feints, and in general, he's a very cerebral striker. I think he's very underrated in that regard. As we saw with the numbers, he doesn't get hit a lot, and he will not hesitate to get out of the way of danger, which is going to be a problem for somebody like Oliveira who wants to create confusion and mistakes through pressure. Islam creates confusion and mistakes through a different way. Charles Oliveira does it with pressure and aggression. Islam Makhachev primarily does it through various attacks, feints, movements, and just creating a barrage of things for you to think about until he can set up the shot and create dilemmas for you that ultimately lead to bad outcomes. He creates these outcomes and he gets your body out of position to where you cannot defend the incoming attack, even if you know it's coming. So I want to take a look at some of that. But in general, Islam, very cerebral counter striker, has a lot of weapons at his disposal, and he's very, very feint heavy, and people bite on his feints all the time, especially other aggressive fighters. So I want to take a look here at the Bobby Green fight, and I want to talk about the probing hand of Islam. He uses his lead hand as a probe to gauge distance, to use it as a jab, to use it as an interceptor to intercept opponents coming in, which I'll get into more in a little bit. But in general, he's always throwing that lead hand out there to get a gauge of his distance, to get a read on his opponent's distance, and to give the opponent something to think about. You're always thinking about this hand that's being thrown in your face. So again, some still images here. Here he is against Green, throwing that hand out there. Green responds to it almost instantly. You know, he kind of feints a jab in this sequence, kind of paws at Green, not with any real meaningful power, just something for him to think about. And Green responds almost immediately by shifting his body way out of position to try to slip an incoming punch. But as you can see, there is no actual incoming punch coming. It's just a feint. As the fight went on, even just a minute in, Green is already starting to reach out for that probing hand. He's trying to meet Islam's hand halfway there to get a read on what he's doing, to block it. He's not really sure if Islam's using it for grappling purposes, gauging distance, jab. There's a lot of confusing things going on here. If you watch the fight, you'll see what I mean. He uses it to paw at him. He uses it to jab. He's touching Green over and over again. He's giving him a lot to think about. During this time, you can also see Makhachev's stance here. He's crouching down. He's feinting the takedown a lot. He feints the shot almost immediately. As soon as that bell rings, he starts feinting the shot immediately. So right away in this fight, Green already has multiple things to think about. He knows that Islam wants to shoot. He's feinting the shot. He's feinting jabs. He's throwing jabs out occasionally. He's pawing at him. He's grabbing his hand. There's already a lot of things starting to build up in the mind. And that's what Islam does here. He allows confusion and dilemmas to start building up in your head. You're not sure what he's going to do and when he's going to do it. What can happen here is, you know, Islam throws a jab here. Again, it's not with a ton of power. You can see the distance between the two. It's more of a feint. It's more of something to give you something to think about. It's something else to focus on. So again, Green goes out of position here, slips it, even though he was already at a good distance as it is, and he returns with a high kick. And because Islam's hand is out there probing already, he's able to catch the kick. He uses it to clinch and push to the fence, which I'll look at later. But for now, I want to also go on to the hooker fight here to show, again, this probing hand that Islam puts up. He's always putting that hand out there, touching the opponent, getting a read on the distance. And this will also allow him to prevent any spontaneous attacks from coming, especially from that lead hand on an orthodox fighter, that jabbing hand. It also allows him to push that hand down and deliver his own cross if he wants to, and also allows him to push the hand laterally side to side to get the outside foot position or inside foot position, depending on what he wants to do with it. It may not seem like much, but it is really the setup for a lot of things that Islam does. Also, I mentioned before that Islam will not hesitate to back out of range. That's part of his cautious style. Oliveira is a guy that loves to push forward. He loves to be aggressive, usually off the bat in most of his fights. As you can see here, as soon as Green starts to launch an attack at Makhachev, he does not hesitate to start backing up right away and getting out of there, which, as you can see by Green's body language, he has to stop the attack. He was lunging forward with a punch before, but now he has to stop the attack because Islam has already darted out of range very quickly. Again, here Hooker throwing a lead jab, trying to catch Islam. He's deflecting it with his lead hand, but also stepping out of range. As soon as the opponent starts to show aggression, Islam's out of there. He's not going to be drawn into firefights. That's not his thing. And that especially changed after the KO that he suffered at the hands of Adriano Martins. That was a very significant, pivotal moment in Islam's career where he changed his style completely. It actually reminded me of when Matt Serra KO'd GSP, and GSP developed a more wrestling heavy, more cautious style in general. GSP did use a lot of wrestling before that, but it was different. He was more cautious. He wouldn't put himself in firefights as much. He didn't attempt as many submissions. He was just a more cautious fighter overall. That's exactly what happened with Islam after he got KO'd, in the sense that he used to have a very flurry heavy style. He would, be very aggressive, flying at the opponent, kind of like Khabib does. A lot of pressure, very similar to how Oliveira is. A lot of pressure with punches. And he would throw big flurries, 4 or 5 punch combos. But after he got caught and knocked out, that changed. A lot more feints, a lot more use of the jab, a lot more use of deflection and parrying, a lot more darting in and out, a lot smarter fighting style for his style. Again, here you can see, Islam is pursuing Hooker, backing him up, but Hooker is going to fire back at him, and Islam, as you can see, darts away immediately, not being touched even remotely by that jab. Simply just gone, out of range, not going to deal with the aggression. And he's also open here for counters. The right hook counter over the top is open, which is something I want to talk about with Oliveira, that he was vulnerable against Poirier. Poirier was landing that right hook over the top over and over again, and that's also something that Islam does to set up the takedown, specifically in this fight. A worry with this type of thing is if you're always moving backwards, you can get stuck against the fence, but Islam has certain ways of dealing with that, which I will point out later. For now, I want to talk about some of his kicks and the way he uses them, because it's another underrated tool of his. Now, Islam's kicking game isn't talked about a lot when you think of his style. You think typically just purely of his grappling, the Dagestani wrestling, his submission game and all that. But again, going back to his striking game here, he uses kicks a lot, and he uses them as feints and to create confusion. Here in the Green fight, he opens up right off the bat. Their names aren't even on the scoreboard yet, and Islam is already throwing a high kick to give Green something to think about, and Green immediately reacts. He has to respect the kick, and he reacts by getting out of position and trying to block the kick. Within 15 seconds, he's throwing a low kick. So we've already seen a high kick, we've seen a low kick. Again, look at Green's body positioning, way out of position, trying to avoid that kick altogether. Only 3 seconds later, Islam throws a teep up the middle. So, already in 18 seconds, you've had to deal with a high kick, you've had to deal with a low kick, and you've had to deal with a teep if you're fighting Islam. There's a lot to think about here. That's already 3 threats, and they're big threats too. If you run into them the wrong way, they can cause a lot of damage. That calf kick can cause a lot of damage. The teep up the middle can either hit, as a body shot, or in the chin, as we've seen with like Anderson and Vitor in the past, or Lyoto and Randy Couture. It can be a knockout shot. Something too that I wanted to point out here is that Oliveira, 4 of his 5 last opponents have been orthodox fighters. Islam being a southpaw is going to present an interesting problem for him. Poirier is the only southpaw that he's fought recently. And with Islam's kicking game, he likes to throw that body kick sometimes, and Oliveira has been open to it before, as an orthodox fighter. Here you can see Pettis landing that exact kick on him. That's something that I wonder if Islam is going to use more often in this fight, as a way to give Oliveira something to think about, and as a way to slowly drain the gas tank of Oliveira over time with those body shots. Here you can see Islam against Thiago Moises throwing that exact kick to the body against an orthodox fighter. Also against Moises, you know, again, the high kick, giving you something to think about, throws it early in the fight. Against Davi Ramos, same thing, early in the fight, first minute, throwing a high kick. Against Arman Saryukin, same thing, high kick, 9 seconds in. Always giving you something to think about, always another feint that he can throw at you. Numerous weapons, high to low. Now, taking a look at the Poirier fight here, I want to talk a little bit about the southpaw issue. So Poirier southpaw against Oliveira, and in this fight, he was getting tagged a lot by Poirier's left straight and his right hook over the top over his own lead hand. Poirier was landing this a lot right off the bat. Again, you can see the time here, 4:48. He's in the middle of throwing that straight that lands as Oliveira comes in with his signature aggressive style. And he's able to hit Charles over and over with that. You know, he steps in right into a left hand from Poirier. Again here, like within the first minute, he's caught perpendicular, way out of position with another left straight from Poirier. This was the other counter that was landing a lot throughout the fight. The right hook over the top over his lead hand. Charles never really had an answer for this until he started landing the knees in the clinch that changed the entire fight altogether. But in terms of just pure boxing and striking defense, he never really shelled up this hole in that fight, and he was getting hit by this over and over again. Again, another example here, Poirier landing that right hook counter over the top as Oliveira steps in, and the left straight up the middle. Just these two punches over and over and over again. Oliveira just had no answer for this, and Oliveira's head movement in general is not very effective as it is. He doesn't move his head off the center line a lot. He's just typically kind of a let's go in there and bang type of fighter. Like, he just wants to go in there aggressively and throw heavy shots, and he's got like kind of that squared up Muay Thai stance a lot of the time. He's looking to land knees, kicks, elbows, things like that. It's that traditional shoot box style, but he pays for it in the sense that guys that are able to throw straight shots up the middle and that hook over the top are able to counter him and land a lot of strikes. So Poirier was able to do that, and it was increasingly difficult as a southpaw. He typically has been taking out orthodox fighters over and over again. Doesn't fight a lot of southpaws in general, so this is something to note as Islam is a southpaw himself. Now, what's really interesting about that right hook counter over the top is that Makhachev used this exact counter against Hooker to set up the takedown. So here they are squaring off. Islam throws the right hook over the top as Hooker steps in to throw a kick, and he immediately drops low while Hooker's way out of position after getting hit by that right hook to snatch up the legs and to hit that double leg into the takedown. So moving into some of the ground game stuff now, there's a big change here, a huge monumental difference in the meta game overall with this fight versus Oliveira's other recent opponents. Difference is that Islam wants to go to the ground, whereas Oliveira's opponents typically don't want to go to the ground. And the guys that do want to go to the ground with them will often find success if they have the skills, of course, to do so. People that were finding success against them were Kevin Lee. Pettis found success, although they had some scrambles in that fight. Felder had success, although Felder did get caught in an anaconda in that fight, but he was able to ride it out, and he was able to dominate positioning after that. Guys like Chandler, Gaethje, and Poirier did not want to go to the ground with him, and even some fighters in the past like Pettis, which I'll show here in a second. But you can see here that the reluctance to enter the guard is very high. When Chandler knocked down Oliveira, you know, he was trying to stay on the outside of his guard. He didn't just jump right into the teeth of his guard to throw ground and pound. You know, he was cautious of it. He later jumps into his guard, but only when Oliveira is badly stunned. Otherwise, he's not diving in. He's not in a hurry to get in that guard. Most people are not. Islam, on the other hand, will look to get down on the ground with him. You know, Oliveira has been using this tactic. He's been using his ground game and the threat of his ground game to an advantage, in the sense that if he gets hurt on the feet, he can go to the ground and allow himself time to reset because guys are not going to follow him. That reset option will not be available in this fight. He's not going to be able to do that with Islam. So again, looking here at Chandler, hesitant to enter the guard. You can see Oliveira here, hands on his head, resetting, just kind of pushing him away with his feet, not dealing with any real threat, just buying himself some seconds to recover from the shots that he took. This is the part where Chandler entered the guard only when Oliveira was badly hurt. So he lands some big shots here on Oliveira. He goes down. This is the part where the crowd's going crazy, and it looked like Oliveira might get finished. You know, he's down on the ground taking shots. Oliveira rolls back to guard, and Chandler starts to strike from the top of guard here initially, still not diving into guard right away, just landing shots hovering over the guard. but eventually gets kind of pulled into close guard here, throwing this big shot where he falls down with the punch, and he ends up in Oliveira's close guard, but he's also stacking his guard here, which is something I'm going to point out about Islam. But he does end up in the close guard, but again, only when Oliveira is badly hurt. Typically does not want to go into that guard willingly, whereas Islam will welcome that. Now, something else too I want to talk about is the illusion of how good Oliveira's guard really is. And here Chandler was fine landing shots from the close guard here. He was able to defend any potential submission attempts and land some damage there. Now, moving on here to the Gaethje fight, Oliveira eats a big right hand from Gaethje and goes down, hits him right on the chin, and Oliveira uses this again as time to recover. And you can see Gaethje's body language here. He is not in a hurry at all to go down to that ground with Oliveira. He just wants him to get back up. Again, Oliveira here, hands on the head, resetting, resting, shaking out the cobwebs, allowing himself to recharge a bit. Poirier, same thing here. Oliveira goes down, Poirier around the outside of the guard. Again, he's not down on his knees, dropping, ground and pound. He's more mobile up on his feet, trying to hit him at range. He does end up going down into the close guard briefly, but again, eventually backs out of there and invites Oliveira to come back up. Just a reluctance from all three of these guys, not wanting to be in that guard unless Oliveira is badly damaged. And in the case of Gaethje, he didn't want any part of that guard at all, no matter the damage. Here we look back at Pettis' fight too. Pettis, ended up winning this fight by submission. He still didn't want to engage Oliveira's guard willingly either. Again, that same posture, holding his head, just resetting, taking it easy, feet up, just shaking out those cobwebs. Okay, let's get into some of the juicier stuff with the ground game here. So one of the things that makes Oliveira great, and the thing that we love to watch about Oliveira, is his high-risk style. He's not afraid to get after it. He's aggressive. He's got that high finish rate. The guy's never gone past 3 rounds. He's always looking for the kill. He's definitely that kill or be killed type of fighter. But the problem with that style is that sometimes it can open him up to getting countered himself or making mistakes and losing positions that he probably shouldn't. So looking here at the Poirier fight, Charles here had gone for a back take against the fence, but instead he falls down and gives up the position, allowing Poirier to get on top or to create a scramble. So he had lost control here, and that is typically not something that you will see somebody like Islam do. In my opinion, Islam's ground game in general and his clinch game is a lot tighter. He tends to make a lot less mistakes. He tends to have a more airtight grip on things rather than going for big moves that allow him to fall out of position. It's just one of those cases, and it's one of the reasons why I believe Islam has the advantage in this fight, is he just simply makes less mistakes. I think Alexander Volkanovski even said that too about him. He just seems to make less mistakes. What makes Charles exciting is his risk-taking style, but it can end up with situations like this where he falls off the top, on a back take. Here against Kevin Lee, he shoots an aggressive double leg. He's trying to drive Kevin Lee to the fence. He gets in pretty deep on this shot, but once they hit the fence and bounce off of it, Charles tries to take him to the side, but that actually creates a scramble here that allows Kevin Lee to end up on top. Once him and Lee were on the ground, he also went for a triangle attempt here, which can be very dangerous, especially in no-gi jiu-jitsu or in MMA where you're very slippery. You don't have the friction of the gi and all that. You don't have, gi material to grab on. It's much easier that when someone stacks you and slips out of the triangle to pass your guard. So when he went for this triangle here, it was worth the risk because of his submission ability, but it ultimately put him in a very, very bad spot when he failed it and had him get stacked and passed. That move alone right there could be the end of the fight against somebody like Islam. I remember Ryan Hall once said that the difference between black belts and a lower belt is that when a black belt takes something, you don't get it back. They take a position, you do not get it back. It's very hard to get out from underneath an elite black belt's position, or if they catch a limb or something like that. Once they get it, they typically don't lose it. Or if you're at least your similar skill level, you've at least put yourself in a position where it's going to take a lot of energy to get out of it. It's going to burn time on the clock, etc. So even if you do get out of it, you're obviously at a huge disadvantage. Now, once Lee passed, he eventually pushed Oliveira to the fence here, to where he started eating ground and pound. So again, that one triangle attempt led to this domino effect all the way to the end of the round that got Charles controlled. So starting back here at the failed takedown, that was 342 into round 1. That triangle attempt was at 117. And, you know, going all the way here to the ground and pound, I mean, he basically lost half a round, all because of that one takedown attempt and triangle attempt that failed. Now, when they were back up again in round 2, Oliveira pushed him to the fence where he tries a knee, but again, he gives up a takedown because of it. He throws the knee, Kevin Lee ducks here, takes the double leg, gets deep in on the shot, no possible way to sprawl there, hard to stuff the head. Also, take note of Kevin Lee's head position here, because I'm going to talk about that in a bit on why Kevin Lee lost this fight and why Islam will most likely not fall victim to the same way that Kevin Lee lost this fight. Head position really tight to the hip here, can't wrap it up for a guillotine, there's no room, deep on the shot, and they end up on the ground. Kevin Lee's head lands perfectly in the middle of Oliveira's chest, eliminating any chance at a neck attack like a guillotine, and Oliveira just simply has to accept this position. We all know that Oliveira has very good transitions. He's an opportunist, like I said. That's kind of the core of his style. He wants to stun you, he wants to hurt you, and then he wants to pounce that submission, create openings, and he's very fast with his transitions. But I want to show here that Islam is extremely fast with his transitions as well. Looking here at the Dober fight, I want you to pay attention here to the clock specifically to see how fast this takes place. So here he's taking Dober's back, and in the next frame he is rolled over into mount. When Dober tries to roll out, he captures the mount here. Just between these two frames alone, 1 second, right? We go from back to mount in 1 second. Now in the next frame here, Islam captures the arm as Dober tries to sit up out of mount, exposing his arm for the arm bar, and this is only a mere 1 second later as well. So just in the matter of 2 seconds, we've gone through 3 positions into a deep submission attempt. We went from back control to mount to just rotating for that armbar, spinning for that armbar, and just capturing that opportunity right away. Islam's mind here is working at warp speed, and you can see him here rolling for that armbar. Still, the time is at 25, only 2 seconds from the original back take position there. He captures the arm, and something I want to make a note of here, I don't like about armbars in this style. No knock on Islam's approach here, of course. The guy is an elite grappler, far better than I, far better than 99.9% of people on the planet. This armbar attempt by him with this leg positioning, the reason I did not like it is it allows Dober to start coming up right here. As you can see, his head starting to peek up rather than his head being down here on the mat. If Islam had thrown that leg over his face, it would push him down. But he went with this leg configuration here where his legs are 2 L positions, essentially. It allowed Dober to eventually start coming up here, which lost the arm. He would have thrown that leg over the face, I believe he would have finished it. Obviously, I'm not in the fight, I'm not on the cage, I'm on the mat when he's doing this, so it's easy to say from a chair. But in general here, it allowed Dober's head to pop up. He starts to roll over and push into Islam, which eventually loses the armbar. Islam does a great job, though, of also countering that, though, and throwing the leg over his face here and to try to salvage the armbar, but ultimately it was too late. So an option here that I would have liked to have seen Islam use that I don't see talked about a lot is the way that Rafael Lovato Jr. hit an armbar in one of his Bellator fights. So you can see here he's got a deep armbar, and he has that same L position with the leg, but he's placed it behind the opponent's head. Now with the top leg, he throws it over his face, creating that downward pressure. And as the opponent tries to sit up, he's going to be able to push him down. So as you can see here, it completely compressed the opponent down. Again, he's got this similar L shape here behind the head, clamping down on his own leg with this top leg, and that creates that downward motion. If you roll yourself and feel this position, it is extremely tight. You cannot do the typical hitchhiker escape where guys will run this way and try to roll out of the armbar. You cannot move. You are paralyzed in this position. So it would have been cool to see Islam throw up something like that to secure the armbar, but I digress. One thing that Islam does really, really well that will help prevent a lot of those spontaneous attacks from Oliveira and spontaneous snap downs and, strikes and things like that Oliveira loves to use in order to create that pressure, to create those sudden moments where he stuns an opponent or, snatches a head or snaps him down into an anaconda choke, those types of things, is wrist control. Now, if you look at Islam's fights, he is always scanning for that wrist. In every close quarters position, Islam is always looking for that wrist. Here against Dober, you can see he's got that wrist control right here, holding his wrist against the fence, typical, Khabib type stuff there. Pushing him against the fence, keeping that arm handcuffed or keeping it locked down. Again here with Dober in the clinch, he's got that wrist control. Always scanning for that wrist. Against Bobby Green, it's a little hard to see here because it's kind of blurry, but Islam is reaching for that wrist in the clinch while he has that overhook. Against Dan Hooker, again, similar position to where Dober was at, reaching for that wrist, controlling his movement, not letting him wrap around for this guillotine like some guys might do. Against Thiago Moises, pushed up against the fence, again, wrist control. Always scanning for that wrist. Against Arman Tsarukyan, Arman is deep on a takedown here, and what is Islam doing? Controlling that wrist, not allowing him to connect his hands, not allowing him to switch off to the double by grabbing this leg, keeping that wrist pushed down, keeping his chest heavy, pushing down on him, sprawling back, but again, controlling that wrist. Again, against Arman in the clinch, controlling the wrist. Javi Ramos clinches up with him. Wrist control right away. And this is a really unique thing about Islam's game, is that he can use wrist control to set up takedowns even when the wrist control is being used against him and his opponent might think that he's in a safe position. For instance, here against Dober, he is locked up with Dober, pushing him against the fence. Dober's got this overhook up here. Islam is actually having his wrist controlled by Dober's hand. And this is generally going to feel like a fairly safe position for Dober. Obviously, he doesn't want to be getting pushed into the fence. He'd rather be in Islam's position, but he's got overhook control. He's got the wrist. He should be, pretty safe from any, shots, ducking down, grabbing the legs, double legs, single legs, that kind of thing. Should be a pretty safe position. But the unique thing about Islam is with his takedown style and his wide variety of takedowns, he can go from a defensive hand position to takedowns without switching the grip. This is huge because it's widely deceptive. You don't see what's coming. And that's exactly what happens here. Even though Dober has this wrist control, here comes Islam moving this foot in there. He still has the overhook as well. Dober still has the overhook. He has wrist control. He still has that degree of safety. But due to Islam's trip game, he's able to start snaking this leg in there deceptively without showing it. It's not very telegraphed. He moves it in, gets it behind Dober's leg, drops towards the overhook here to create that takedown without ever switching his hand position once. This is a huge factor in this fight. If you can take guys down without telegraphing the takedown with your hands, you have a huge advantage, obviously, and not many people can do this in the UFC right now, and almost none of Charles' opponents have even offered up this skill set. Again, another example of this is when he fought Arman Tsarukyan, and they were here clinched up, over-under position. He's throwing some strikes here casually, and then they kind of lock up in this double wrist control. Arman's reaching for it, Islam's reaching for it, but the ultimate point here is that their wrists are tied up. Again, Arman should feel fairly secure here. His hips are backing away. This wrist is tied up. He's got the underhook here. There's a lot of things going for him that'll prevent, spontaneous shots at his legs or anything like that. But again, Islam can hit takedowns without changing his hand position due to his trip arsenal. And right here, Arman throws a knee, which ends up being a fatal mistake. It takes his weight off this left leg. He has all his weight on his right, which allows for a perfect rotational takedown opportunity for Islam to kick out this leg and to lean that way and take Arman down. The bonus about these types of trips and takedowns with the arms tied up is that he can end up in mount. So he can go from this position to mount very quickly just because of the arms being tied up, wrist control. The opponent does not have use of their arms to defend the advancement in position or wherever Islam happens to land. And in this one, he lands in the mount. And not only does he land in the mount here, he lands in an incredible position to where he has this arm exposed on the far side, which Islam tends to go for Kimuras on, as does Khabib, or as did Khabib. And Arman here has his arm stuck as well. There's an arm trap going on there. So once Islam is on the ground, he likes to use a method of passing called tripod passing, and it's a method that applies a lot of pressure to the opponent, and it lends itself typically very well to getting to half guard. Now, I'm gonna tell you why that's very significant to this Oliveira fight specifically, and Oliveira's vulnerability to being held down in half guard. We'll get to that. But first, starting with the tripod passing here, you can see when Islam gets the takedown on Bobby Green, he goes into this tripod position, which is one leg here, and then the head position here. So you essentially have this three-legged table position. There's three legs of the table in this tripod position, with his weight being driven forward, down and forward into the opponent. And the head will usually be in one of two spots. It'll usually be high up on the chest like it is here, or it'll be down near the hip, which we'll see some examples of that. You can see him put his head down near the hip instead to keep that pressure applied. And he's got this leg shelved here as well, which is killing the hip movement of Bobby Green. So he can't just shrimp out or create a scramble. He's effectively paralyzed in this position, and the forward motion of him digging his feet into the ground, from Islam's feet being dug into the ground, pushing forward, is just creating a ton of pressure on his sternum, keeping his back flat. Now, those of you that are unfamiliar with what the goal of passing guard is, ideally you want to have the opponent's back flat on the mat. And ideally for Bobby Green, he would be on his side. He doesn't want his back flat on the mat. He wants to be able to shrimp his hips out. He wants to be able to move more this way, get on his side, use his hands to push Islam away, etc. So this is a very, very bad spot to be in from the defensive position. Now, the tripod is also a position that Demian Maia looked to use. Again, you have this leg position here. His other leg, which you can't see, is also sprawled out, and he's got this piked position with his torso driving down. And again, his head is down here near the hip. The purpose of the head position being near the hip or high up on the chest is to prevent head attacks like guillotines and other neck attacks, which is obviously very relevant when fighting somebody like Oliveira. It'll keep his neck safe to use this type of passing if the fight reaches the ground. Khabib, again, here using the tripod against Michael Johnson. One leg here that you can't see. Head position, very high on the chest, driving down in that pike position. Underhook on this side, just completely killing his hips and his movement. And back to Maia, you can see here that one of the advantages to tripod passing and passing low like this is that you are able to isolate one leg between your own. So as you can see here, his leg, Magny's leg, is in between Maia's, and he's also pushing down here on that knee to keep it there. This plays a very pivotal role in being able to secure half guard, which we'll get into here in a second. One more example of GSP doing the same thing, tripod passing against Dan Hardy. You know, he's got that tripod position, leg in between, head being driven, head high on the chest, cannot attack his neck here. It's not an option. He's pinned to the, Dan Hardy's pinned to the floor, back flat, unable to move. Murillo Santana is a big user of this in high-level jiu-jitsu. He will create this tripod with his legs, pike down as described before, and a lot of the times he underhooks this leg and lifts the hips up off the mat, which can kill mobility even more. This is a style that's used obviously by a lot of great passers. So here's an example of Khabib using tripod passing to isolate the leg in between his own to secure half guard. So he starts off here in the tripod position against Johnson, steps his leg over this way, stepping over Johnson's foot. He's stepping over his foot to clear it. So going back one frame, he's in between Johnson's legs here, or his knee may be over Johnson's thigh. It's tough to see. He steps over Michael Johnson's leg completely, isolating the leg between his own here and between Khabib's leg, which is going to allow him to start dropping this way onto that leg and securing half guard. So he's got this great position in half guard to where he has access to dropping, that's a terrible arrow, sorry about that, to dropping elbows on Michael Johnson's face. If this arm happens to come to the outside, that'll open up the Kimura, which is what eventually Michael Johnson got finished with. And yeah, it just opens up a lot of options here to create a lot of pressure, a lot of ground and pound and submission attempts on that far arm especially. So going back to Islam here, he uses his tripod position against Dan Hooker. He's got that wrist control as we talked about before. Tripod position, head down near the hip, cannot be guillotined. That effectively blocks the guillotine here. And he's got a ton of position moving in. Now he drops into half guard here by isolating the leg in between his own, like Khabib did with Johnson. And that allows him to get into that advantageous position. Continuing to isolate the leg here, dropping into half guard where he prefers to be. And here he's fully settled into this top half position. Hooker is throwing up an underhook under his arm, which is typically what you'd want to do. Again, if you're not familiar with grappling, you would want to underhook here and start to shrimp your hips out this way. But that's not going to be possible here in this position because of the downward pressure that Islam is creating. And he's also grapevining the leg. So this is pinning Hooker's hips to the mat and not allowing him to come out this way. He's not able to move. Again, you can see Islam's preference for the half guard from the tripod here against Dober. Pushing into the tripod, moving to the right to isolate this foot in between his own, isolate Dober's leg in between Islam's legs as he moves to the side. Also, actually going back to that frame, you can see him pushing down here. He's pushing down on Dober's leg to push his leg back this way. Once he secures that leg in between his own, you can see the downward pressure that he applies here in half guard with that shoulder pressure. You can see Dober wincing from how much pressure he's applying from that shoulder in the neck. He definitely has a tendency to want this position from the tripod. Later in the fight, this position would be Dober's undoing altogether. You know, again, he got caught in half guard here. His leg is trapped in between Islam's. Again, that downward pressure being applied and just immense shoulder pressure that Dober eventually tapped to. Again, Islam's head is hidden here high in the armpit. So the guillotine position here would just be almost impossible. Even if he was to wrap this arm around his neck, he's not able to get his hips in a position to where he can hip into the choke and finish it. Islam is just in a superior position. And also, if he wrapped up a guillotine here, it'd be a huge mistake because that would set up the Von Flue choke where Islam would just choke him anyway. But Islam is such a savage. His pressure is so immense that he applied a Von Flue choking type of pressure even without Dober wrapping this arm around his neck. He just did it from raw shoulder pressure, which is just incredible and a testament to not only his strength and pressure, but his technique. Now, the reason why all of this is relevant is that Oliveira has shown a tendency to get trapped in bottom half guard against guys that are willing to go on the ground and are good grapplers themselves, good wrestlers, and will ground and pound from that position. Oliveira, I feel, has a huge flaw here, and I'll show you why. So Kevin Lee got this position on him after they got to the ground and was dropping, elbows down here on his face. He's got this top half position, and Oliveira was essentially stuck here for a long, long time. And eventually it got bad enough to the point where Kevin Lee even isolated this far arm. This is death against Islam potentially right here. If Islam gets this arm, you're probably not getting it back. And in the case of Hooker, he ended up getting Kimura'd from there. So again, Kevin Lee's cross body position here isolates this arm, and it also opened up this inside arm too. So his arms are separated from his body, creating a much more weaker, vulnerable position. And the big danger here, like I said, the big red alert is how he was able to isolate this arm next to his own neck and to keep Charles pinned in half guard. Again, Charles completely flat on his back, not able to hip out, stuck in a really bad spot here. This continued throughout the fight. Again, Kevin Lee was even able to get his arm way up here again, and look at this arm really extended out from Kevin, moving this underhook up slowly higher and higher. Again, Oliveira unable to get out of this position. Again, we see arm isolation happening here. Really bad news if you're fighting a guy who likes to hunt Kimuras. This is the last thing you want, and especially against Islam, who wants to be in this top half position. Again, look at the shoulder pressure position here. Islam loves to lean this way and to drive that shoulder into the neck. I mean, this is basically serving Islam's best position on a silver platter, or one of his best positions. So going back to the Hooker fight here, you can see this crossbody half guard position similar to the one that Lee had on Oliveira, and how Islam exposes that far arm, which would eventually be Hooker's fate. It would bring him to the submission by having this arm exposed. But again, that same crossbody top half position. And if you go back and forth between these two images, I actually mirrored this image. You can see it's been flipped here by the text being backwards, but they almost look identical. You can see the crossbody position from Islam. You can see the crossbody position from Kevin Lee. And pay attention to the arm that's exposed on both sides here. It is nearly identical. And Islam was able to finish the fight from this position. And Oliveira allowed himself to get here against Kevin Lee, a guy who is a great grappler, great wrestler in his own right, but in my opinion, inferior to Islam's ability. So as you can see, Islam here starts wrapping up that wrist against Hooker after exposing the arm, pushes it down to the mat, and eventually secures that Kimura that taps Hooker. Again, Oliveira showed this weakness against Paul Felder, who was able to finish him on the ground with strikes. He got caught in this same bottom half position, completely flattened out by Felder's top half pressure, and was unable to get out for a while. Again, you can see Paul Felder driving his shoulder into the neck here from this top half position, keeping Charles pinned here, hips completely paralyzed, back flat on the mat. Just not a good position to be in at all, and especially against somebody like Islam. I want to talk briefly about the mount position real quick, because Islam did get the mounted position on Saryukin when he did hit the throw. Now, this is a threat to everyone, not just Oliveira, but it's unique to Dagestani fighters how they handle the mount. I had never seen this before Khabib. You know, maybe some other grapplers have done this somewhere, but as far as MMA goes, I had not seen a guy talk about this at a high level like Khabib does. Now, with their mount training, they will literally do an exercise where they will clamp down in the mount position with their legs, creating this inward pressure to hold the mount and not use their hands at all. The purpose of this exercise, or the way this exercise is performed, is the bottom position guy will try to escape mount and the top guy tries to hold the mounted position just with their leg pressure. This is unbelievable that they can actually do this and hold this position against really high level guys. I mean, the clamping strength of your legs is incredible to do this. And they practice this on a regular basis. The advantage of this position is that it frees up your hands to work. So they don't have to use their hands to underhook and hold down the mounted position. They can use them freely to drop strikes. Also, what you can do is you can have a hand free to act as a stabilizer. You can see Maia here using his hand as a post as he drops elbows onto Gunnar Nelson. And this creates a ton of stability that if the opponent decides to buck their hips up to try to knock you out of mount, you won't be going anywhere. This locks in a very solid mount to have this active posting hand like this. Another thing that they do, and I'm sure everyone has seen by now with Khabib, is the leg bundling. You know, they will triangle their legs or wrap up the legs with their own legs and create this bundle here, which also can turn the hips over to the side sometimes and just completely smashes the hips on themselves, making mobility basically impossible. I mean, you're a sitting duck at this point, and you can see him dropping punches here, and you can see an example of him using this active post. So by using this unique mounting style of just practicing that leg clamp, practicing bundling the legs, it creates a threat that Oliveira is not typically going to face with most opponents. And these Dagestani guys have really mastered this, especially at the elite level with Islam and Khabib. You can see Khabib here bundling the legs against Johnson, triangling the legs, which just completely kills your hip mobility and makes it hard to get anywhere and leaves his hands free to drop those strikes. Islam did the exact same thing against Saryukin against the fence, and was able to leave his hands free to drop strikes and to, prevent any bucking attempts, any side-to-side scramble attempts, and it even opens up the ability to control the wrists and further paralyze the opponent. Now let's talk about the problem with the guard, because I've heard people talking about how Oliveira's guard is a big threat and you don't want to be in his guard, and we've seen the proof of opponents reluctant to go in his guard. And yes, I generally agree. You don't want to go into the guard of any jiu-jitsu black belt, let alone a guy who's got the submission record in the UFC and is the lightweight champion. Like, that scenario is just an awful idea, right? But it's really interesting, and Luke Thomas pointed out a stat that caught my ear. And it was that in 21 submissions, Charles Oliveira has 21 submissions in the UFC. Absolutely insane. But out of those 21, only 2 of those were initiated from a starting position in guard. Typically what Oliveira will do is snatch up like a neck in a guillotine and fall into guard, or pull guard with an anaconda or something. He typically snatches a submission in transition, or when he specifically has an opponent hurt from strikes, which is really his favorite method. He loves to hurt the opponent with strikes and then jump on the submission to finish them. But when he does that is when he typically lands in guard with the submission already locked up. He rarely hits submissions while already in guard on the ground, as you saw with like the triangle attempt on Kevin Lee, where he missed that attempt. So one thing that he will do too is utilize closed guard a lot to either recover, hold guys down, or launch attacks from it. So I want to take a look at how Islam tends to handle the closed guard. So here he's in the closed guard of Drew Dober. He's even got an overhook wrapped up there. And From there, you know, what he likes to do is he'll either push out and start to break open those legs and drive forward to do so, kind of stretching the opponent out. But what he really likes to do here with the closed guard is get his arm underneath the legs and start to shelve the legs on his hip while stacking the guard forward like this. So when you stack the hips of the guard player like this, you're removing all their mobility. When your hips are up off the ground like that, you lose all the ability to attack from the closed guard. Typically from closed guard, you want your hips to be able to swivel out to the side to create angles to launch attacks. If your hips are flat, your attacks are limited to almost nothing essentially, and if they're lifted up in the air, now you're really limited. And you know, when a guy's got them wrapped up like that, also applying this inward pressure with the legs, it's further going to screw up your opportunities as the guard player to launch any attacks. And again, he's also in that tripoding position here, driving down with pressure. So it's a lot of pressure on that closed guard. It's really, really tough to try to hold your guard through this or to launch any attacks. Again, you can see the shelving here, his leg coming right here on his hip. He's got this one up here as well. Hips lifted off the ground, not letting him put his hips on the ground to launch any attacks, and also not letting him close up this guard. We could see that Chandler did this exact same thing against Oliveira. Hips up off the ground, pushing into the guard. Oliveira is doing more of the work here with the legs. Chandler isn't necessarily shelving it on his hip. It's more so Charles keeping this high position, trying to get a high guard to hopefully launch an attack. But it's tough when you're pinned against the fence like this with all this pressure driving into you. So this was good offensive guard play by Chandler, being in the closed guard, stacking it, and removing his ability to attack. Also in the Felder fight, we saw him use a guard stack here as well. He kept pressuring in, driving in with his feet here, and especially with his hip pressure to stack this guard. And look at where Oliveira's hips are at. They are way off the mat. I mean, there is a huge gap here between his hips and the mat. And Felder was stacking him over and over again like this in this fight. Additionally, Felder was just not afraid to engage him in the guard, and he would just drop elbow after elbow and just, you know, engage in this guard as long as he kept his head position up high and would follow Oliveira's hips to not allow him to get an angle. This really limited the attack options of Oliveira, and Felder's grappling knowledge and wrestling ability allowed him to just, you know, put Oliveira in bad positions to where he couldn't attack. And even if he did, Oliveira would have an answer right away with his positioning and a good defense against it. So, you know, eventually he was able to just overwhelm him with strikes here, and his offense created the best defense in the sense that Oliveira just had to deal with that damage over and over again. Another thing that that Felder did that was very interesting to Oliveira is that he kept reaching for this wrist control. So this automatically starts killing a lot of options that Oliveira has. He would like to break this posture and maybe get like an overhook on this far arm, push an arm inward to try to throw up a triangle, overhook this far side with this arm. You know, there's a lot of various things you can do from closed guard, but in general, you need your hands free. You can't just, you know, throw these legs up and choke a guy with only your legs. Or maybe BJ Penn could with that dexterity in his legs, but typically you need this hand free. So Felder kept tying up his hands with that wrist control, similar to Islam's tendency to grab wrist control, and he would drop ground and pound on him, you know, interrupting this guard play, and he never really allowed Oliveira to get to a good guard position to launch any submissions. As you can see here, again, continuing to just ground and pound, sitting in this closed guard. Charles Oliveira's hips are completely flat on the mat, not able to angle out, and just eating elbow after elbow. This style that Felder employed reminds me of Fedor versus Nogueira, their first fight specifically, where Fedor went into the teeth of his guard essentially and just dropped ground and pound over and over again. You know, and a key in that fight was that Fedor either kept both arms in or both arms out to prevent any triangle or armbar attempts. And Nogueira at the time was regarded as the best submission specialist in the world, especially at heavyweight. And if you go back and watch that fight, which I encourage you guys to do, you know, anytime Nogueira throws up a submission, the crowd goes crazy. He's like, whoa, you know, and Fedor at the time was an underdog, but with his sambo and wrestling style and submission knowledge, similar to Islam against the jiu-jitsu fighter, he was able to fend off those attempts and drop ground and pound, and Nogueira couldn't do anything except eat it. And that was something that Felder did against Oliveira very successfully until he TKO'd him in the second round, I believe. So I talked about how Kevin Lee messed up the fight against Oliveira with that he was essentially dominating. I mean, Oliveira was tired. You can even see he looks tired here. I mean, he looks like he's been through it because he's been grappling with Lee now for nearly 3 rounds. He's been in bottom half a lot. He's been dealing with ground and pound. Lee's been controlling his hips. He's been losing some of the scrambles in the takedown game, which I'll also show a few screen caps from that after this. But with this, I want to focus on how Kevin Lee got his neck caught by Oliveira and how he really did it to himself. Of course, Oliveira snatched up the opportunity, and it's incredible to do that against an elite fighter like Kevin Lee. But I want to show how Lee really just set this up for himself to get caught, and how Islam is very unlikely to do something like this off a shot. Kevin Lee shoots a single here, and I want you to take note of the distance here. Look at how far Kevin Lee's head is from Charles Oliveira's body. There's a large gap here in between the two of them. Before, when I was showing Kevin Lee's takedown when Oliveira threw the knee, he had his head right here on the hip position. He had it very tight to his hip, so he was able to prevent the guillotine. But look at the difference now. He shoots head to the inside, which typically is actually a good move. Head to the outside, if you shoot a bad shot, will get you guillotined a lot of the time. But Kevin was using head to the outside very effectively early on and keeping it very tight to where Charles could not wrap him up. But this time he feeds his head right to the inside, and you can see that Charles' body is slightly rotated. So his head is literally firing right into the armpit of Charles Oliveira to wrap up this guillotine. And not only that, because of the gap that they had previously between them, when Lee caught that takedown, when Oliveira came in with the knee, he was glued to the hip right away. There was almost zero time to react. It was there really fast. The difference here is with this shot, Kevin Lee is grabbing this takedown from pretty far away to where there's this big gap that you can see him coming in. It's not as spontaneous. It's more telegraphed. You can see him coming in, and you can see that Oliveira is starting to pull his arm into position to catch his head. And you can see his hand is open here to guide Kevin Lee's head into that guillotine. So right here, Kevin puts his head right in that guillotine spot, right in the breadbasket, and Charles wraps it up, and then Kevin moves his head to the outside. It would have actually been better to keep his head on the inside and start fighting the hands, but Kevin keeps his hands on the leg and moves his head to the outside where Oliveira can continue to gain leverage on this guillotine and bring his arm through to grab his other arm to finish the choke. As they're falling down, look how deep Kevin's neck is. I mean, Charles is nearly ripping his head off here. Look how much of his neck is exposed. Just a brutal position. So now the difference here, I want to show Islam shooting a bad shot and what he does that's very different from Kevin Lee. Islam against Davi Ramos, ADCC champion, high-level submission guy to say the least, an elite of the elite. And Islam here is going to throw a strike and drop to a takedown. Now he gets caught reaching here. Again, look at the gap between them. Huge gap, similar to Lee, except this one's even further. But Islam is still reaching for this leg. He misses the takedown completely, and instead of following and trying to chase this like some guys might do, on their knees, or just, continuing to sprint at Davi, he pulls back. And here Islam is completely disengaged after taking that bad shot. This is very similar to his in and out footwork with striking, to where he won't hesitate to back up if things are not going well, he's under pressure, someone's being super aggressive coming at him, or, he just doesn't like the feel of something. So let's talk about some of the takedowns against the fence, including what Oliveira is typically looking for when he shoots for a takedown. So Oliveira typically likes to either get a body lock or clasp his hands around the legs for a double leg, or shoot an underhook and work for, different clinch takedowns. But mainly that body lock is really what he likes to go to. So again, here against Ferguson, he shoots in, wraps both arms around him. It's kind of like a hybrid body lock. Ferguson's arms trapped in there. He's got his arms wrapped around the waist, charging towards the fence. And, they get there, and Oliveira secures that underhook, wrapping around his back to secure that body lock, back here with his hands clasped together. And Tony makes the mistake putting his leg up here to try to block the hips from coming in and getting closer to him to take him down. But unfortunately, in this circumstance, it actually just lightened this leg to allow Tony to be lifted easier. So as you can see here, he just picks him up anyway, leveraging his leg off of Tony's shin, like pushing into it and pushing his hips in anyway. He did not block it well enough, and he was able to lift him up with this body lock grip. Now he later hits a double leg entry on Tony, again going for those double clasped hands. He really likes both hands clasped together around both legs or the body. That's typically what he's aiming for. He doesn't shoot a lot of single legs. and not from memory either. From a lot of the film I watched on him, he does not shoot a lot of single legs. So he's looking for this double leg, this body lock position. Again, Tony brings up his leg here to try to block his hips from coming in. But again, unfortunately, just makes himself lighter and easier to take down. So here we can see Islam deal with the double leg attempt against the fence a bit differently than Ferguson did. As soon as Ramos shoots in, Islam turns his hips, and if he could sprawl here, he would shoot these legs way back. But since he can't do the fence, he's in like a quasi semi sprawl position here. His hips are heavy, pushing into Ramos. He's arching his back, and he's pulling up with this hand on this arm, so it's not wrapped low around his legs here. This helps kill a lot of that double leg. So he's hipping in, he's sprawling back, he's turning to the side, which is something that Joanna would do very well with her takedown defense against the fence. It's very hard to clasp your hands and get that takedown if they shift and face this way. It'd be better if Islam's back was flat against the fence this way, making it easier to directly wrap the arms around the legs. So right away, pulling up on this, sprawling the hips and shifting his weight almost immediately. Completely different reaction than with Ferguson, and a really potent defense. So here he continues. You can see how hard he's arching his hips forward, arching his back, and continuing to pull up on this arm. Ramos is not in a great position now. His head is way up on the chest. It should be lower than that typically, unless he's shooting more of a straight on like blast double. But this is going to be really hard to finish with this head position right here because of Islam's hip positioning. At this point, Islam has pulled the arm so high up now that the double leg is completely gone, and it's turning into something completely different position at this point. And he's established his own overhook, or he's starting to wrap it up. And like Tony, he puts the shin up for a defense, but he's doing it from the opposite side, a different angle. So this is going to be more efficient at blocking the hips from coming in because Islam is facing this way. Another notable thing, as discussed before, is he maintains wrist control this entire time. You know, as they're fighting here, he's hunting for that wrist underneath, and he establishes it here so that Ramos cannot clasp his hands behind his back. Another defense Islam will do is the head stuff. So here Thiago shoots a double on Islam, gets him to the fence, and Islam responds right away by pushing his head down. Now this kills his posture. He's not able to drive up and into Islam to work on finishing that double leg or to clasp his hands. You can see his hand right here is visible. He's not able to wrap it around his body because of his head positioning. And Islam will continue to push the head while circling around this way. He replaces the hand on the head with his own shoulder pressure, which keeps that posture broken. And here he ends up reversing the position, and now he's pressuring in on Thiago. And again, wrist control as usual, the Islam special. Now, the times that Islam has gotten taken down or caught in a bad situation, he's very quick to react. And this is what I want to talk about again, similar to him being an opportunist earlier. He's very quick to react to openings, and he's very quick to react to bad positions used against him or being put in bad spots. He will not accept being put in a bad spot. He moves very quickly. So Thiago gets a deep double leg here. Islam's going for a ride. As they fall down, Islam shoots this guillotine, which apparently was a pretty bad threat. It's hard to see how deep it was from this angle. He jumps over the top, so it must have been pretty bad. And if you watch this fight, Islam snatched this up really quick. Like, it was in a split second as they're falling down. So really impressive if this was actually that deep to cause a legitimate threat. That's just amazing. And the time that he snatched that up. This ends up creating a scramble to turning into Thiago as he starts to get the better position. He's not going to accept a side control from Thiago. And Thiago jumps on his back. He starts to take his back right away. Great move by Thiago, obviously, but he's not able to get this hook in. And the reason he's not is look how close Islam keeps his knee to his elbow. He's blocking that space. Now, this will be pivotal against somebody like Oliveira, who's very opportunistic at jumping on backs when somebody's hurt or when he sees that opening. So he's really good here at defending this. And now right away, Islam immediately pikes his position almost into that tripod passing position to dump Thiago over the top. You know, he doesn't have these hooks in, so he doesn't have good control. So he's going to spill right off the top like this over the top of him. So another example of his urgency was against Arman Saryukin when Arman gets deep on a takedown on him. So they're falling to the ground here. He's got him wrapped up in this body lock position. As they hit the ground, Islam is already turning into him. It looks like, you know, Arman might throw him this way like this and end up on top. But Islam doesn't allow that to happen. Even though his hips are in a pretty bad position, he swivels them back this way and starts looking for this overhook almost immediately. I mean, you can see how this is blurred. This is happening at a high speed. And he immediately starts coming back up to that turtle position, looking for this overhook and creating that scramble. Now he eventually heists his hips back the other way, and again looking for this overhook as Arman continues to pursue this double leg. You know, Arman is continuing to drive into him, and Islam is simply not accepting position. He's got this arm posted, overhook, and they're continuing the scramble. Now they get up to this position, which would be prime for a back take usually. And, you know, Arman's got this double waist grip. It's looking pretty good for Arman from here if he can either drag him down or jump on his back. But Islam performs a peek out right away, which knocks him down. You know, he twists this way and throws his elbow back, which knocks Arman this way, not giving him a second to breathe. You know, Arman's here thinking of an attack or looking to attack. Islam says, no, we're going to continue scrambling here. He is simply not going to accept these bad positions. He keeps moving. So again, Arman gets to a position where he's still got that waist lock. He's still got that double lock around the waist. But look what Islam's doing. He's looking to break the hands, still not conceding to position, still not allowing him to throw, you know, like a choking hand up here or anything. He's got hand control. Arman pulls him down, but again, Islam is still not accepting this position, and he starts turning back into him this way, which is actually starting to look bad for Arman at this point, even though he's got control. But Islam is just fighting every position here, scrambling at all times, never conceding. And one more time in this position, they scramble to his knees. This is a pretty long scramble going on here. Really crazy sequence, great fight. If you haven't seen it, go watch it right now. Amazing grappling match. But they end up here, and again, Islam still fighting the hands, always working on those hands or wrists. You know, he's always working on the correct thing that he should be working on to break these positions, and not allowing Arman to put him in any real submission danger or danger of strikes. It's just purely grappling right now, and he's working to get out of there. Make it up to the fence. Again, fighting the hands, always fighting the hands, never conceding. Now, the reason why this is important is Oliveira, we've seen him concede. We've seen him concede against Felder. We've seen him concede against Kevin Lee. We've seen him get stuck in bad spots and be content to accept those spots. Islam will not accept those spots. He will continue to fight. If you threaten him in a grappling position to put him in a bad spot, he will not stop. Oliveira, you know, if he can push you to the fence, he will look to cut a perpendicular angle on you. And you can see here what Poirier did wrong. So Oliveira fires in with the shot, pushes him to the fence, and already he's cut the angle on him. You know, Poirier was not able to get this overhook successfully, which allowed Oliveira to sneak around to the back and cut that angle on him and successfully get the back take this time, which is where the fight eventually ended. This is going to be really difficult to do on somebody like Islam, who has great overhooks, great hip positioning, very fast hips, but will also intercept guys with the tie clinch, which I'll talk about here in a second. Another thing too is, even if you push Islam into the fence and you have, you know, an underhook position, you've got your arm around the waist, you've got that body lock, it can sometimes be quickly used against you, which is what happened here with Thiago. Thiago pushes in, and immediately Islam threatens with the hip throw and throws him in the air. He eventually scrambles back up, and they recover position back to the fence. But I mean, as soon as he pushed in here, I mean, a two second time gap here between these screen caps, he's immediately going for a ride. You know, Islam just does not accept these positions. He's going to always look to keep moving and get that upper hand, and he's got the cardio to do it. Now, on the topic of the fence and pushing in, and, you know, Charles Oliveira really loves to push guys against the fence, apply pressure, land those strikes, you know, and get the tie clinch and all those things. But I want to point out that Islam is also a big fan of using the tie clinch. You know, he likes to intercept guys that are coming in after him by using that tie clinch, which he can then use to set up body locks and takedowns and different things, including strikes. So again, here looking at the Ramos fight, Ramos starts to push in, and right away, Islam counters by throwing up this tie clinch to intercept him coming in to try to gain head control as Davi pushes in. So as he pushes in, he secures this tie clinch, immediately breaking Davi's posture, which is going to, I mean, completely mess up this blitz attempt coming in with these strikes. And he counters by throwing a big knee. He pulls him right into it, pulls him this way right into that knee. So using his own momentum against him, Davi runs right into that knee. and it nearly KOs him. I mean, this is a testament to Davi's chin, because this would have put a lot of guys out. But this goes to show that a blitz attempt towards the fence can end badly very quickly due to Islam's tendency to grab that tie clinch as the opponent comes in. Now, here's the opposite, where Islam pushes into the fence against Thiago. He drives in with a flurry, gets Thiago to cover up, and as he pushes in, Thiago turns him around, and Islam ends up with his back against the fence, but immediately grabs this tie clinch to gain posture control, and again, throws that knee. Now, what's interesting here, Islam will go from the tie clinch and grab the head so that the guy will bring his hand up higher to try to defend it or swim his own arm in. And as he does that, Islam will sneak his arm underneath to get this body lock position. So he will effectively use his intercepting tie clinch to eventually secure a body lock, to which he can now use for his signature takedown game. Another thing to note too about his takedown game against the fence is that he's very diverse and very fast with his hips. So he's very quick to go from, you know, snap ties and snap downs to double legs to single legs, back up to trips to hip toss. There's so many bad positions that you can end up in against Islam because of his propensity to move from takedown to takedown and chain them together so well. You take the wrong step, you shift your hips the wrong way, or even in Dober's case, if you think that you're safe with your wrist control, you can still go for a ride. So it's extremely deceptive, and just another tool in his toolbox is using that tie clinch to get a better position. Again here, Dober pushes in this sequence. Islam immediately, again, going for this tie clinch, wraps it up right here around Dober's head for that posture control. Islam gains that posture control, pulls Dober in, and look, as Dober's arm comes up, Islam sneaks in that hook around the back and gets this clinch position right here, which eventually gets Dober taken down by a trip to the ground. So he secured this position by using that intercepting tie clinch once again. Now I want to take a look here at a sequence with Felder and Oliveira, where Oliveira pushes Felder to the fence, going for like kind of this hybrid double leg body lock takedown, but he was mainly looking for a double leg here, I believe, because he shot him pretty low. So as he comes in, Felder starts to defend by pulling up on that arm and shifting his hips sideways again, trying to point his body this way. Again, great defense. And he eventually pulls Charles' arms all the way up. So now they're in more of a body lock clinching position. He's got his own underhook, and he establishes his own overhook here with Oliveira pressuring into the fence. So he's got this overhook. Oliveira's got an underhook here, and he's driving in. Now Oliveira breaks this clinch to throw an elbow, which is, I mean, signature Oliveira here, just, you know, throwing chaos against you at the fence. It's what he does best, how he hurts guys horribly. You know, he'll do a ton of damage here and look for that submission. But as he opens up for this, it makes him vulnerable to the tie clinch. So Felder gets this tie clinch and then does the same thing that Islam does. As Oliveira drives him back into the fence after defending this, his arm was up higher before, Felder swims this arm underneath and gets this body lock position. This would be prime for Islam to do exactly the same. Tie clinch, underhook, body lock. Felder used it against Oliveira. Islam loves to use it in general. So this video has been mostly looking at Islam's strengths and the things he does well against Oliveira's tendencies and mistakes that he tends to make, or positions that he's allowed himself to get into. And the reason I've done that rather than looking at a lot of Oliveira's strengths is that I feel that Islam's strengths versus Oliveira's weaknesses are a bigger story in this fight rather than Oliveira's strengths versus Islam's weaknesses. Now, that's not to say that Charles has no chance at this fight. Charles is a champion for a reason. He has an insane finish rate. He's got power in his hands. He's got knees. He's got elbows. He's got tenacity. The guy just loves to go to war. He loves to fight. He's a tough dude. He's been fighting the top competition. He's fought more top 10 guys than Islam has. Islam has yet to fight a top 10 guy. But judging this off style and the potential that Islam has and the potential that he's shown, I believe that he is a direct counter to Oliveira's style more than Oliveira is a direct counter to his. Now, Oliveira's strength with the striking can be a counter to anybody. So if Islam runs in and gets KO'd in one of these sequences, I'll hardly be surprised because Oliveira is such a powerful, great striker. He can really do damage quickly in tight spaces and sneak knees in and things like that, especially to the body. You know, his adjustment against Poirier was brilliant. So one thing I do want to point out here in that vein to give Oliveira some credit and a potential hole in Islam's game that I saw that I don't necessarily like is that his propensity or tendency to give up Kimuras sometimes. So here against Arman, he was fighting against the fence and Arman starts to lock up this Kimura position. You know, he starts to lock up that double wrist lock. Here on the ground as well, he locks it up again when Islam is in that half guard position. Drew Dober was able to do the same thing. Again, locking up that double wrist lock Kimura position, and again from bottom half. Now this position is very hard to finish, and no one has actually done anything with these Kimuras, but locking them up has kind of made me go, he may be vulnerable to Kimuras in certain positions, and that can be dangerous against somebody like Oliveira, who's such an opportunist, because not only can he use it as a Kimura, he can also, thread his leg through and possibly turn it into an omoplata. You can use these to set up different arm bars and triangles and things like that, depending on body positioning, or you can use it to, apply pressure to sweep the guy this way. So while he may not be in direct danger of being Kimura'd from bottom half guard or, against the fence and being finished here, it could set up a chain reaction that someone with Oliveira's skill set could possibly leverage and turn into something that is far more dangerous than it should have been originally. He let go and Islam swung his arm around, and that's where he locked up this nasty pressure. So, going for that Kimura can also get you countered brutally and possibly end the fight, but it is something worth noting that I've seen a couple guys lock that up against him, and it does have me wondering, is that a possible vulnerability of his? So overall, I feel like Islam's style matches up really well with Charles, and I think that he can get the win here and should get the win, at least on paper, due to his strengths against Oliveira's weaknesses. Now again, I said that Oliveira could counter him at some point with a big strike, stun him, maybe even submit him if he's dazed. Everyone is vulnerable to submission no matter how good of a grappler you are when you're hurt, and that's actually something I didn't like about people saying that Gaethje's grappling is horrible, because he got subbed by Charles, and he's been subbed by Khabib. The issue is with Charles, at least, he was stunned badly. And, I challenge anyone out there, defend a choke, defend a bad position in the grappling when you've been hit and knocked to the ground by an elite fighter. No one's grappling is going to be good at that point. Anyway, Islam's cautious counter-striking southpaw style mixed with his controlling wrestling and varied takedowns is just a very controlling, safe style in a way. He's not reckless. He's not going to get involved in firefights if he doesn't have to. And he's going to put himself in positions to where he can use his greatest strength, his grappling, to control the fight and not put himself at risk. It's very similar to what GSP did when he started implementing his wrestling more and more to control guys and to reduce that knockout variance and risk. I really like the way that Islam uses that risk control and always hunts for it everywhere he goes, because that really reduces that spontaneous upside of an opponent just, pulling something out of a hat and landing some big guillotine or anaconda or a punch or an elbow or something like that. And I think that's going to pay dividends here against Oliveira. One of the unknowns here is with both guys' cardio into the championship rounds. I personally think that this fight probably gets finished within 3 rounds, but in the case that it does go longer than that, none of these guys have been in long fights. The longest was Islam against Thiago Moises, where it just went, it barely went into the 4th before he ended it. But, Charles has only been into the 3rd round. Islam typically only goes into the 3rd. And these guys are both, very dominant against their opponents. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Also, Islam's chin has not been tested against the elite of the division. So I'm interested to see what happens there. Because if Oliveira has a path to victory, I believe it's in the striking rather than the grappling. And, overall, I just feel like Islam makes less mistakes overall than Oliveira. Oliveira tends to take high risks and leave himself open for things. And when he does that, it makes him very entertaining to watch, but it opens himself up for counters or positions that can turn into scrambles and things like that. And I feel that Islam just makes less mistakes overall and can take better advantage of those positions. And his propensity to continue fighting when he's in bad positions until he's in a better one plays perfectly into going against a grappler who's going to push him against the fence or try to take him down or look for opportunistic, submission attempts. I think Islam can defend all of those, and he will not concede any position like we've seen Oliveira do in certain fights. And, Oliveira's tendency to concede those positions plays perfectly into Islam's strengths, including the half guard and things that we looked at there. So overall, looking forward to this fight. Can't wait for it. I think Islam takes this one though. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.